The ground shook before I even reached the window. 3 massive city snowplows barreling down my quiet cul-de-sac like a steel-plated stampede. Their blades were lowered, their lights were flashing, and they weren't aiming for the street. They were aiming directly at my driveway. More specifically, at the 4-foot wall of perfectly sculpted, suspiciously intentional snow someone had built overnight to trap me inside my own home. Across the street, my HOA president Brenda stood frozen on her porch pink-robed teacup, and a look that suggested she suddenly regretted every petty decision she'd ever made. But the real twist: the Plows weren't even the craziest part of what happened next. 10 minutes earlier, I hadn't been staring down a steel cavalry, I'd just opened my front door and forgotten how to breathe. Because instead of a normal winter morning, my driveway ended in a vertical cliff of snow, 4 feet high, perfectly carved, smooth sides. Not a drift, not an accident, an installation. And right on top sat a tiny, lopsided snowman staring at my front door like a smug security guard. There was only one person on Elm Street who would build something this petty and still call it community improvement: Brenda, our HOA president. The woman who once cited me because my welcome mat was too cheerful. I crunched across the yard and found her exactly where I expected on her heated porch, wrapped in a plush pink robe, sipping tea like a suburban Bond villain. "Morning, Brenda," I said, pointing at the ice barricade. "You install a new landmark on my property." She didn't even pretend to be surprised. "The HOA guidelines clearly state that snow removal must prioritize common access routes," she replied, voice smooth as ice. "Any spillover onto private spaces is your responsibility." "That's not spillover," I said. "That's a siege." Her lips curved just slightly. Then, perhaps she murmured, "You should wake up earlier." That was the moment I knew this wasn't winter inconvenience. This was war. I slammed the door on Brenda's snow wall and dropped my boots hard enough to rattle the coat rack. "That woman has lost her mind," I said. Sarah looked up from the kitchen mug halfway to her lips. What did she do now? Upgrade from nasty notes to structural harassment? She called a 4-foot barricade spillover and told me I should have woken up earlier, I said. The knot that lived behind my ribs whenever her name came up tightened into one solid hot fist. That feeling had been building for 3 winters. Today, it finally had something to push against. Sarah set her mug down. "You gonna let her get away with it?" I thought of the violation for our too cheerful welcome mat, the written warning over the angle of my snow shovel, the way she just stood there measuring our recycling bins like they were crime scenes. All tiny things, all designed to remind everyone who supposedly ran this street. "Nope," I said. "She wants to play the rule game. I'll play the rule game." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Mike, that's your creative but technically legal voice." "Exactly," I said, reaching for my phone. "She loves regulations, right? Let's see how she feels when the city enforces theirs." "Please tell me you're not calling a lawyer." "Worse," I said. "Public Works." I punched in the city's snow hotline and put on my best taxpayer, who knows where the bodies are buried tone. "Public Works, this is Gary," a tired voice answered. "Morning, Gary," I said. "I need to report a serious obstruction around a fire hydrant on Elm Street." That got a pause. "We talking buried car or buried hydrant?" "Hydrant," I said, watching Brenda's wall through the window. "There's a 4-foot snow structure completely blocking access to it and trapping my car behind it. It doesn't look like wind. It looks engineered." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear radios, phones, the kind of chaos only a city in a blizzard understands. "Sir, we're buried out here," he said. "Is there an active fire?" "Not yet," I said. "But if someone built a barricade in front of emergency access and we all just ignored it, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. For whoever signed off on the plow routes," he exhaled. "We're prioritizing arterial roads today." I softened my voice just a hair. "I get it. Honestly, you all are heroes. But I also heard the mayor's riding along to check snow removal. You know how cameras love hydrants. It'd be one hell of a photo if he finds one intentionally blocked in a residential neighborhood." Silence. I could almost hear him picturing the headline. "What's the address?" he asked. 12 Elm. Hydrants right by the driveway with the snow wall. You literally can't miss it." "All right," he said. "I'll see about rerouting a crew." "Appreciate you, Gary," I said. "You're saving more than a hydrant today." I hung up. Behind me, Sarah leaned on the doorway. "So, phase 1, I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. "Now we see who Brenda underestimates more, me or city liability insurance." The first engine growl reached us a half hour later. Sarah and I met at the window, like kids spotting a parade. 3 massive plows turned onto elm blades, lowered lights strobing in the gray morning. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Maria's kids pressed their noses to the glass across the street. "Those are for you, aren't they?" Sarah said. "Technically, I said they're for public safety." The lead truck rolled to a stop in front of my driveway, lined its blade up with Brenda's masterpiece, and didn't even bother to hesitate. The steel hit snow with a crunch that vibrated the windows. The wall shuddered, cracked, and then exploded into chunks that flew across the yard and into the air like we'd set off a controlled demolition. 2 more plows followed, carving away the base, pushing the remains out into the street and down the block. In under 3 minutes, my driveway went from prison door to clean black pavement. Across the way, Brenda stood on her porch pink robe bright against the white. The usual tight superior line of her mouth was gone. Her jaw hung open, like someone had unplugged her operating system. But the plows weren't done. They eased past her house in formation, blades still down, scraping the street in front of her immaculate driveway. Each driver gave the smallest wrist flick at the last second, sending a perfect fluffy 2-foot ridge of snow curling onto the edges of her concrete. Not blocking, not illegal, just inconvenient, and very, very visible. The last truck lumbered by. The driver leaned out, beard-frosted grin huge. "Hydrant's clear, sir," he shouted. And whatever that other situation was. I stepped onto the porch, raising a glove in salute. "Appreciate the thorough response, Gary." He winked, tapped the side of his truck, and rolled away, leaving a clean street, a free driveway, and an HOA president who just watched her power move, leveled by bigger machinery. For 3 days, Brenda vanished into a kind of chilly silence. No friendly reminders tucked under doormats. No emails about refuse bin orientation. She still walked her daily patrol, but she avoided my side of the street like my driveway had turned radioactive. On day 3, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Not the flimsy white ones she used for casual harassment. Thick cream paper with the Elm Street HOA letterhead centered at the top. The kind of stationery that screams, "You're about to have a bad day." I opened it on the porch. "Emergency meeting of the Elm Street Homeowners Association," it read. "Agenda: unauthorized alteration of common area snow distribution and misuse of municipal services by resident Michael, last name." I read that line twice. "Common area snow distribution," I said, walking inside with the letter. "Is that what we're calling, 'You buried my car'?" Now, Sarah took it from me scanning. "Misuse of municipal services," she read. "You made one phone call. She built a wall." I dropped into a chair. The hot fist in my chest didn't spike this time. It just sat there steady. "Public shaming didn't work," I said. "So she's going back to her favorite arena. Rules, titles, and a room arranged so she gets the good chair. So show up," Sarah said. "Just don't show up alone." The next morning, instead of drafting some long speech, I put on my coat and started knocking. Mr. Henderson answered his door with a cardigan and a puzzled smile. "Morning, son." "Problem with the Plows? Problem with Brenda?" I said. "She's holding an emergency meeting to nail me for altering snow distribution." His eyebrows climbed. "After she built that wall across your drive, yeah." I thought, maybe I'd ask if I'm the only one who's had issues. He chuckled a dry, papery sound. "She tried to write up my garden gnome last year. Bartholomew. For what existing? For excessive whimsy," he said. "Threatening visual harmony." I told her he served 2 tours and suggested she salute. I left with a promise he'd be at the meeting. Maria was next. She met me at the door with a toddler on one hip and a look that said she was already braced for bad news. "Is it the chalk again?" she asked, because she called my kid's sidewalk sun graffiti. "Worse," I said. "She's accusing me of weaponizing the city plows. I figured if she's made your life miserable too, you might want to be in the room." Maria's eyes lit up in a way that had nothing to do with joy. "Tell me when and where." House by house, the pattern repeated. Tom's visually intrusive basketball hoop, Mrs. Gable's flower pots that clashed with Brenda's color chart, a guy at the end of the block who'd gotten a letter because his wind chimes exceeded acceptable auditory diversity. Everyone had a story. Until that day, most of them had ended with a shrug and, "But what can you do?" Apparently, the answer was fill a room. By Thursday night, the community center parking lot looked like a block party. People who usually waved from behind windshields were walking in together, talking, shaking their heads. I stepped through the doors and saw every metal chair occupied neighbors lined along the walls, kids sitting cross-legged near the back. At the front, Brenda adjusted her stack of papers, gavel neatly centered beside them. For the first time since I'd moved onto Elm Street, she looked out at a crowd that wasn't just there to listen. They were there to answer. The room felt too small for the number of people inside it. Folding chairs creaked. Winter coats rustled. Even the fluorescent lights buzzed louder than usual, like they sensed trouble. At the front, Brenda adjusted her papers with the precision of a surgeon. 2 board members, Stan and Deb, flanked her like reluctant bodyguards. She rapped the gavel. This emergency session of the Elm Street HOA is now in order. Half the room rolled their eyes. Brenda cleared her throat theatrically and held up a handful of blurry photos, the Plows in front of my house. This, she said, voice taut with fake concern, is an egregious misuse of municipal equipment, a deliberate redirection of common area snow for personal convenience, a threat she emphasized to the uniformity and safety of our community. Murmurs rippled across the crowd, some confused, some amused, some very, very done. She angled her chin at me. Michael, do you deny orchestrating this? Spectacle, I stood. No, I said plainly. Gasps popped like popcorn. I called the city because my driveway was blocked by a 4-foot wall. That was spillover, she snapped. It had straight edges, I shot back. Spillover doesn't come with architectural plans. A few people snorted. Brenda tightened her grip on the gavel. She didn't know it yet, but she'd already lost the room. Before Brenda could launch into her next accusation, Mr. Henderson rose slowly from his chair. Cane planted. Back straight. Brenda, he said calmly, since we're airing grievances, I'd like to revisit my garden gnome. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. His voice remained steady. Bartholomew was cited last summer for being excessively whimsical and projecting nonconformist energy. You claimed he threatened community visual harmony. He's a gnome, Brenda, a retired one. People laughed harder. Even Stan cracked a smile. Maria stood next. My kids drew a chalk sun. A sun. You mailed us a formal notice calling it graffiti. Tom raised his hand. My basketball hoop was visually intrusive. Mrs. Gable added, my flower pots were the wrong shade of blue. A man in the back said, you told me my wind chimes had excessive auditory diversity. The room erupted. Brenda's composure buckled. She slammed the gavel down. We are not discussing gnomes and wind chimes. This meeting is about him. She jabbed the gavel toward me. For calling the city, I asked. Because your snow wall blocked my driveway and a fire hydrant, Deb shifted uncomfortably. Brenda, did you actually supervise the plow routes that morning? Brenda stiffened. I oversee community standards, so you did coordinate the wall, someone shouted. Brenda's lips pressed into a thin, furious line. The crowd wasn't just awake now. They were turning. The meeting disintegrated into tense whispers and not-so-whispers. Brenda tried to regain control, tapping her gavel so hard it sounded like she was trying to summon demons. But when the board announced they would review procedural fairness and enforcement methods, Brenda looked like she'd been slapped. She adjourned the meeting abruptly and stormed out. I thought that was the end until the next morning when a landscaping truck pulled into my driveway. A man with a clipboard, stocky bearded, bundled in a thick work coat gave me a professional nod. You, Michael, yeah. He lifted the clipboard. Got an urgent work order paid in cash by a... Brenda. He squinted. Driveway snow mitigation assessment and decorative berm construction consultation. I blinked, then grinned. She'd tried to hire him to document my infractions, but her own ridiculous wording had turned the job into something else entirely. Well, I said, would be ashamed to waste her money. 5 minutes later, we were loudly discussing optimal berm height, ice gargoyle placement, and a snow redirection moat, all within earshot of Brenda's house. When she burst outside, red-faced and shaking, the contractor simply read her own work order back to her line by line. You paid for a consultation, he said politely. We're consulting. Neighbors gathered again. Phones came out. Someone whispered she's melting down. Brenda let out a strangled noise, turned, and fled inside, slamming the door so hard her wind chimes screamed. And just like that, 3 winters of her iron rule cracked clean down the middle. The moment Brenda fled indoors, the cold air loosened, like someone had finally cracked open a window in a stale room. Sal tucked his clipboard under his arm, gave me a satisfied nod, and headed back toward his truck. Neighbors drifted toward my driveway, in small clusters, half pretending to check their mail, half openly staring at the place where Brenda had detonated her dignity. Mr. Henderson shuffled up first, leaning on his cane, his mug steaming into the winter air. Well, he said, peering over the rim of his glasses, I haven't seen a meltdown that impressive since the summer she tried to outlaw wind chimes. I snorted. You think this counts as a victory, son, he said, tapping my arm. I think this counts as a turning point. Maria crossed the street with her kids, bundled like marshmallows. You realize, she said low enough for only us to hear, that what you did today is going to live in neighborhood lore forever, right? Her daughter pointed toward Brenda's house. Mommy, is she going to build another snow wall? Maria laughed. Not today, honey. People lingered not out of nosiness, but because the hold Brenda had over them was cracking and everyone could feel it. A little awe, a little relief, a little of that quiet rebellion neighbors only show when someone else finally stands up first. For the first time since moving to Elm Street, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next notice, the next complaint, the next absurd accusation. The street felt warm, even with the cold biting at my face. Stan and Deb approached next, still wearing the same strained expressions they'd had at the meeting, people who hadn't realized they were sitting on a powder keg until it blew up under them. "Michael, Stan," said, rubbing the back of his neck. "We wanted to talk before we head back to reassess a few things." Deb nodded, arms folded tightly against the cold. "First," she said, "there will be no fines or sanctions regarding the Plows. The city confirmed you reported a hydrant obstruction. That's well within resident rights." "Good," I said, since I didn't alter any common area snow distribution. Her lips twitched as if she wanted to laugh, but remembered she was technically still in uniform. "Right. About that phrase?" She exchanged a look with Stan. "We're rewriting several bylaws. They're too vague, too open to creative interpretation." Mr. Henderson coughed behind me. "You don't say." Stan cleared his throat. "Enforcement letters will now require full board approval, not just the president's. And unless it's an actual safety issue," Deb added quickly, "no more surprise notices. Residents deserve warning and a chance to correct things before receiving formal write-ups." They both glanced toward Brenda's house. "She's still on the board," Deb said carefully, "but after today, we'll be taking a closer look at her approach." "Her reign of terror," Maria suggested from behind me. Deb didn't confirm or deny. "Let's call it reviewing leadership style." Stan extended a hand. "Thanks for showing up tonight. And for, well, not building an actual moat." "No promises," I said. "Winter's long." They cracked matching, relieved smiles and trudged back toward the community center. The neighbors didn't disperse immediately. They lingered a few minutes more, talking quietly, laughing softly, sharing stories they'd been too nervous to voice before today. Slowly houses drew them back in. Doors shut, porch lights clicked on, and the street settled into something it hadn't been in years. Calm, normal, belonging to the people who actually lived on it. Sal's landscaping truck rumbled past one last time before pulling away from the curb. He rolled down his window and grinned. "Hey Mike, if you ever want to actually build that snow fortress, give me a call. I've been sketching ideas. Only if Brenda funds the sequel," I said. He laughed, gave a salute, and drove off taillights, glowing red against the pale street. I stepped inside, peeled off my gloves, and walked into the kitchen. That's when I noticed the card stuck to the fridge, a glossy photo of a city snowplow arcing snow across a road. Inside, in thick block lettering, someone had scribbled, "Stay Frosty, G." I shook my head, smiling. Gary, unofficial patron saint of municipal justice. Mug in hand, I returned to the front window and looked out over Elm Street. Kids were still stomping down icy patches. A couple walked their dog. Somewhere someone's wind chimes, yes, the excessively diverse ones, tinkled in the breeze. Then I saw her, Brenda, standing on her porch, not glaring, not taking notes, just watching. Her shoulders slumped a little, like someone had finally unplugged the spotlight she'd spent years shining on everyone else. For a moment, our eyes met through the distance. No words, no threats, just a quiet realization on her face that the street wasn't afraid anymore. I sipped my coffee, the steam fogging the window's edge. Funny thing about snow, you pile enough of it in the wrong place, and eventually someone's gonna move it. You try to bury people long enough, and one day the plows come roaring in. And sometimes, just sometimes, all it takes to stop an HOA tyrant is a phone call, a well-timed consultation, and a neighborhood that finally decides it's done being quiet.